catching this on the replay, thanks for joining me. I did a live stream yesterday for a live set that I did for a 4-day online music festival called Clown Fest 4, put on by my good friend Mark the Acid Clown Gardner. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a complete, slow, and super geeky, detailed walkthrough of exactly all of the elements that are making up this set, exactly how I put it together, and exactly how I'm performing it. I hope you guys have found, are going to find this useful, rather. And first thing I'm going to do today is go ahead and tune in on my YouTube channel so that I can chat if anyone joins the stream. Let me go ahead and get a little bit of music going in the system here. And we're going to discuss all of these sounds in detail in just a moment. Hey, what's happening, guys? We got 7 people joining me already. All right. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Can you hear my voice okay over the music when the music starts to get loud? Just let me know if I need to turn the music up or down, or my mic up or down, and we'll get into this. All right. Hey, thanks, Skinny. Hey, what's happening, Ed? Hey, Ian. Hey, Wall. Thanks for joining me today, everyone. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and turn all of these tracks off here. And we're going to go ahead and start from the absolute beginning. And we're going to talk about all of the elements that are making up this live jam. I find that I find that a lot of people are putting out live jam videos like every day. I'm subscribed to tons of people who are putting out new live jam videos, but very few people take the time to actually walk through their setup and show you exactly what they're using, how they're using it, and why they're using it, so that you can expand your live jam game as well. I started following a YouTuber maybe a year or so ago named Tatro, who does some amazing live jams based on Ableton and some other software. And he did some videos where he broke down his techniques on how he was actually doing these live jams and creating like live looping in real time. And that really, really benefited me personally as a producer, and I want to share that type of content, not just the hey, look at me and see what I can do, but rather let me explain to you how I did this so that you can benefit potentially from some of these techniques as well. I knew that this was going to need to be a 20-minute set from the beginning. That was the time slot that we were all allotted for this particular show. And my original intention was to challenge myself and see if I could create the entire 20-minute set using nothing but my Eurorack system. I know a lot of you heard me talk about that goal before building the set. But I'm relatively new to the Eurorack workflow, and as I started putting these pieces together, I found that to get where I really wanted this jam to be, that I was really going to need to rely heavily on some outside gear, and we're going to talk about all of that today as well. On this jam, I'm relying heavily on the Virus Dark Star, and I'm also relying heavily on the Quasi MIDI Revolution. I also could not have gotten the vibe of this jam without a new piece of gear that we're going to talk about as well today, which is the Erica Sense Acid Box 3 desktop filter. But we'll get into that piece in just a moment. The first thing that I did to open the set was I wanted some sort of like a texture that I could just kind of fade in to sort of bring an atmosphere right at the beginning. And I'll go ahead and fade that in now so we can take a listen to that. If anybody has any questions at all, please feel free to drop those in the chat. Hey Sean, hey Lee, hey Wall, hey Kenny. All right. This texture is being made up of two Mazatron Wavemorph VC-DCO oscillators, and I'm running both of the oscillators through a little mixer and into the Mazatron Quad Cutoff filter so that I can low pass filter the sound, as you can hear here hopefully. Now, I don't have any specific control over this texture, being able to turn it on or off or send neat modulation to it. It's only just existing as just a simple pad for the intro of the set to establish an atmosphere to start with, and then I sort of use the low pass filter to just filter the sound until it's completely gone from the mix. So using this as my beginning atmosphere, I'm then able to start some drums and whatnot and get the actual jam started. We'll hear now that there isn't really anything going. I've got the ability with this set to literally turn every single track, every element on or off in real time. Another thing that's really important about this particular jam and how I put it together is I'm not really relying heavily on one sequencer, like a master sequencer where everything is programmed out, and then with the switch of one button, I can, switch to a different set of things that are programmed out. This would be considered like using scenes mode in Ableton. So I don't really have that kind of a setup or a workflow. I really like that if I can get that established. But with this sort of an environment, I wasn't really able to, it's not really sort of conducive to programming everything out ahead of time. I wanted to be able to, leave myself lots of things to do in real time. So the key here is that I can literally turn any track in this set that we're about to, all these little elements that I'm going to show you, I can literally turn any of these elements on or off at any time. So the only master sequencing or the only master sequencer of the set is me. I'm in control of all of the arranging in real time, which is certainly cool because you can take the set wherever you want to go at a moment's notice, but it's also, it removes the safety net, and there's quite a bit of chance for you to, make a mistake in real time. So that brought a whole new level of challenge to this mix. Let's see here. I am using the Digitact as my master sequencer in that it is programming out these drum sounds here. So I have let me see, start using a little bit. Okay, so we have a kick drum here. The kick drum is just a sample. It's being played back from a Tip Top Audio 1 sampler. I'm sorry, it's being played back by the Squarp Ramble sample player. So this is just a kick drum from one of my sample packs. I chose a kick that wasn't too thunderous, because I wanted to be able to, add a lot of different layers over this kick drum. This is the only kick drum that we're using for a 20-minute set, and if I used like a super thundering, fill up all of the frequency spectrum kind of huge techno kick, they wouldn't really give me a lot of the frequency range left to do things like bring in 303 lines and extra synth lines and mid basses and whatnot. So this is the kick drum that we're using. Hope everybody can hear okay so far. Yeah, it feels good to be the conductor. A little scary too sometimes, Brian. Okay, over this, we've got a clap sound that you're not hearing right now, and I'm going to explain why. We've got a ride cymbal here. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go ahead and press stop on the sequencer so that I can discuss this for a second before I just try to throw the concept on you. What I've done is I've taken some of these sounds and I've rounded them through an Erica Sense quad VCA. Now a VCA is basically just a volume knob. It gives me a CV input to have control over that volume knob. So what I'm doing is I'm running some sounds through this VCA, and then I'm using the Mazatron clock divider to slow down my master clock by quite a bit. And what I'm doing is I'm using these really slowed down signals, like I'm actually using 2 clock dividers to get this. I'm taking a divided clock out of one and I'm sending that into another to get that really slow. And then I'm using these triggers to actually trigger the VCA to open and close in time with the beat. Now that may sound a little bit confusing, but we're going to hear what I'm talking about in just a minute and you'll understand entirely. What this is doing is it's allowing a few of my drum sounds to turn on and off automagically in time with the groove, so that every 8 bars something changes in the drums. And you're going to hear this right now. Let's go ahead and put this on. So here we have the ride, and we have the clap, and we have the kick drum. Now we're just going to let this play for a minute. I'm not touching anything. I'm going to go through this again. Now listen close. Do you hear how that ride cymbal is now gone and it's been replaced by an open hi-hat and I haven't touched anything? Let's keep listening. Bear with me, it's coming. Do you hear how we just switched back to the ride cymbal? The hi-hats are now, the open hi-hat is now gone, and the clap is now gone, and I haven't touched anything. This is the beauty of this auto magic system that I've set up here, using these clock dividers, sending a signal to open and close VCAs to allow or not allow the sound to come through. Do you see how we just turned off the ride cymbal and the open hi-hat came back without me touching anything? So this was the first thing that I wanted to set up, was that to get the drums to have a little bit of auto magic movement on their own, being as though I'm the master sequencer of all of these tracks, and that basically everything here is just running in real time, and all I'm doing is deciding which tracks are running and which tracks are muted or unmuted at that time. It was really, really beneficial to get some movement and variation to happen automatically in the drums, so that when I'm over here doing other things, I don't have to worry that the groove itself is going to constantly evolve and keep sort of changing and helping me establish sections that feel like patterns instead of just, a random groove that sort of doesn't feel like it's anchored down. Okay, so I'm going to do actually some videos that focus specifically on this auto magic muting technique where we're turning tracks on and off automatically. But for now, let's move forward. So I can bring in some more drum tracks. Let's see here. I've got an impact sound that happens, you know. For those of you who've been watching my live streams, you know I love that impact sound to happen like every 8 bars to help keep me on the grid. In this session, I put the downbeat every 16 bars rather than every 8 bars. And at the end of those 16 bars, I made a riser sound. So every 16 bars, we kind of get a little bit of a push feeling and then a little bit of a momentum release when the impact sound comes in. I'm going to go ahead and just solo these drums, and we're going to play that for you. Four, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're halfway. Here comes the riser. Now listen. So as the drums are automatically turning on and off, I've got that build-up riser sound and impact sound happening to further, establish that there's different sections with different transitions. And here we have some stuff still, you know. That's the thing, is all these things are just going and going. It's only up to me what I turn on or don't turn on in real time. Let's see here. So you'll hear actually that I don't have a start and stop per se on these hi-hats, which have now turned off automatically. But that's just the benefit of that. The only things that I'm controlling in real time from the Digitact is this kick drum, this clap, which is turned off because of the auto magic, this open hi-hat, we've got a shaker, and a ride, which is turned off because of the auto magic. Let's see here. Let's show you guys how I've got this bass set up. I'm using the Platts module. This has sort of become a go-to for an FM bass sound. And I got the new Erica Synths Black sequencer that I'm going to be relying heavily on in the future. And for this jam, the Erica Synths Black sequencer is controlling the bass line, a synth arpeggio, and a cool percussion part, which we'll get into in a moment. But basically, I don't have the Erica Synths sequencer connected to where I can start and stop it in time when I just press play, you know what I mean? So I have to do that manually. So what I was doing in this set was I have my texture, you know, going, right? I have my drums, you know, going. And I'm just counting it out to where when we get to the 1, I press the sequencer to start. 3, and now we have a little bit of a bass going. I can mute these other tracks. Now this is the Platts module creating this bass. But the Erica Black sequencer is able to send gate information, pitch information, and also 1 lane of modulation information. So if we listen closely, you might hear that the bass line is kind of moving a little bit through some different tonalities. And I'm using the modulation lane from the Erica Black sequencer to create this. Let me show you what I mean. If I take the modulation away from that sound, it's just a really static 1-note kind of a droney bass line. Not really interesting. It does go over the drums, but it's boring, right? You can hear those things that are auto-muted in the background just a little bit there. But if I use the extra lane of modulation inside of the sequencer, and I send that to the timbre of the sound, with a little bit of interesting rhythmic modulation, which is in time with the sequence because it's coming from the same sequencer. Now we get these variations in the tone of the bass, and it starts to sound a lot more groovy. Really slots in there with these other drum sounds. But the same concept with this as the kick drum, in that I wanted the bass to not be too big and too thundering, because it's pretty much the only bass sound that I'm going to be using for the full 20-minute set. And if I have the kick or the bass like too thundering, it's going to really be difficult to bring in and out all of those other elements to the mix. So this is what I chose. It's kind of like, I want to say almost like a mid-bass, in that there's some low frequencies and there's some high frequencies as well, but it's not like just a super, super deep, thick techno bass, which is again going to take up so much of the frequencies in our mix. Trying to find sort of a home for everything frequency-wise. It isn't sequencing through different speeds, actually. It's just, it basically gives me like a modulation lane, but the modulation lane is a 16-step modulation lane, and it's you get 4 bars to sequence with in the Erica sequencer, so that's moving just a little bit differently on each measure of that modulation. And I can adjust, you know, how much of that modulation is going to the bass. We can really crank it up. I like being able to sort of have control over sort of how much of that modulation is going to the bass in real time. So if we want to make a more subdued section of the jam, I can kind of tame that modulation if I want, or I can bring it back up again. I didn't actually utilize that morphing of the modulation in real time, but it would have been a nice thing to get to. So we have a bass, we have a kick, we have some drums, but we're certainly missing some melodic content here, some higher frequency content. So the first thing that I created was I created some dub chords. These are being created using the Qubit chords module that I like to use so well. Now, it sounds like I'm filtering this chord stab in real time, but for those of you who've been watching my live streams, you know that I'm not actually filtering the chord, that when I scroll through the waveform in the Qubit chords module, that's just the built-in waveform to the sound. It gives that sort of filter effect. So I didn't need to use an extra filter to assign to the chords. I'm just moving the waveform. I really love this module. So let me so I can really, it sounds like I'm filtering that right down, doesn't it? And just like that, we can turn the drums on and off in real time. I'm using the DivKid mute modules to be able to turn tracks on and off in real time. They allow you to route CV or audio into them, and then it's just a switch. You've got 4 switches per module. I've got 2 of these so that I can just sort of mute and unmute tracks in real time as needed. Okay. Cool. So definitely being able to bring that chords in real time and sort of get the effect of filtering it in and out was really, really helpful to sort of either help build momentum or to help, you know, bring back the momentum in certain sections as I'm kind of fading it out and maybe fading another, sounds filter up so that I can really work the frequency spectrum here. I actually did quite a bit of that using filters to kind of adjust the vibe of the jam in real time. Sort of that built-in filter sound to the qubit chords module was really key. And let's talk about the acid box here and the virus Darkstar for a bit. After I got that sort of main groove put together with the drums kind of turning on and off and me being able to turn them on and off, and then also this bass line being modulated, we've got these chords here. I felt it was time to start adding in, more melodic lines and arpeggios and whatnot. I mean, I knew I had to keep the audience's interest for 20 minutes, so I knew that, I definitely wanted, quite a bit of changing melodic content to be present in this jam as well. So what I did was I made a recording of what I had in the system, basically that we just heard, the drums, the bass, and the chords. And then I went ahead and just loaded that into Ableton as a loop. And I started going through my huge collection of presets for the Virus Darkstar, looking for arpeggios and techno sounds and anything that, might complement this set. I knew that I could get away with using an awful lot of sounds because, this is 20 minutes and I like to keep it moving. So I actually found 20 presets in total. I made a list of all these presets so that I could kind of keep track of where I'm at, a couple highlights on some of the presets that I like more than others. But this allows me basically in the end, I went with arpeggio presets only, and some of these presets work really well when you just hold down one note, and some of these presets work really well when you hold down a chord. So I sort of divided them up, into which section those were, better sounding with, whether it was just a note or whether it was just a chord. And I have a few different patterns in the Digitact, and they're basically the same pattern, but they change whether the Digitact is sending a one note MIDI message to the Darkstar or whether it's sending a chord. And that's really all that I'm doing. The drums are the same. I have 4 patterns in the Digitact in total, so that I can go back and forth between a 4 on the floor pattern and a kind of a broken kick drum part for sort of a more, breakdown, because you can't just do 4 on the floor for 20 minutes and never take a break. Like, the audience will get frustrated with you, right? And I brought in some other drum loops for just that reason, but we're going to get into those in just a minute. So basically, once the virus starts going, it's just going. The Digitact is always sending a message to this, telling it to either hold down an arpeggio with a note or hold down an arpeggio with a chord. And as you heard just a moment ago, with me doing the filtering on the chord and whatnot, I really wanted to have that exact same kind of control over the sounds that are coming out of the virus. And I spent a lot of time. I got really in deep into the virus and started learning how to really program and detail assignments to the modulation wheel. So that my goal was that I was going to be able to, get in here and make some adjustments to the sounds that I found and make it so when I roll the mod wheel, it filters those sounds down in the mix. And I learned a really valuable lesson in this attempt. And that is, I was unable to get the result that I wanted because quite a few of the patches that I'm using in the Virus Darkstar have LFOs that are already moving the virus's filters. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, think of it this way. If the filter is already somewhat opening and closing, even if I use the mod wheel to send the filter all the way down, the LFO is still opening and closing on that filter, even if it's just a little bit. And what I wanted was the ability to just at any time in this jam, just gently filter the virus down or up. And I just wasn't able to get that sort of result using its internal, tools. And so I spent quite a bit of time searching again for the perfect stereo filter. Now, stereo is really important here because there's lots of mono devices available or pedals or whatnot, and they're a lot cheaper as well, but I really need a stereo signal. I don't know if you've ever taken like a really fat, wide stereo sound, like something that might be coming from a Darkstar, for instance, or, you know, your favorite synthesizer, and then running that into a mono input of any kind. And the amount of clarity and sonic goodness that you lose is just, I mean, it just kind of ruins the sound, basically. So I really, really needed to take that extra step and make sure that I found a stereo filter. And that was a lot of searching and a lot of really hard decision making. And I came up with the decision to go ahead and get the Acid Box 3 from Erica Sense. It's a standalone hardware filter that operates either as a stereo filter or a mono filter, and it sounds absolutely fantastic, and it does exactly what I needed it to do, which is that any time during this jam, I have complete control over filtering the sound that's coming out of the Virus Darkstar. Now, why is that so important? I'm not really able to turn the Darkstar on or off, per se. Remember before when I was talking about how I don't have like one button and it changes everything, like in a scene mode? I don't have that here. So once the Digitact is starting it up and sending these arpeggios and holding notes down, it does not stop. And what I can do is I can use the filter the same way that we did with the filter that's on the intro pad. I can use the filter to just filter out the sound, or I can use the volume on the Darkstar itself to bring the sound in and out. But once this starts going in the mix, it is just going the whole time. And all I can do in this jam is either change presets, filter it out, or fade it out. Let me show you a couple of my favorite presets that I've got in the Darkstar for this jam. Just brought in one of the ARPs from the Darkstar, and I can kind of filter it a little bit here. Gonna bring the other tracks out so we can focus on this sound a little. Hear what's happening with the filter. So I can fade it, not fade it, I can filter it, low pass filter it way down like this. If you can't hear that, put your headphones on. And I can filter it all the way down. And then it's way back there, but when the other sounds in the mix are going, you just don't hear it. It may as well be faded all the way out. So if I want to remove the Darkstar during the mix, I can use this filter as a fade out or a fade in. And here are the drums changed again there without me having to do anything. I can't stress how important that sort of a thing is, you know, that some things are happening without you having to do it. I've only got so many fingers and so many hands, and this is a lot of things to keep track of in real time. So those drums, just doing that little bit of magic for me, that really, really helps. Okay. So turning it down, but then I want to talk over it again. So this particular pattern is just holding down one note. And the first batch of presets that I'm using in the Darkstar are just that, just sounds that sound cool if you just hold down one note. And I've got quite a few of these. I really like this one. Right? It's got a really nice flow to it, really strong sound that kind of takes the mix in its own direction, right? And I can filter that using the Acid Box. I can't stress enough how important it is for me as a producer, especially especially when I'm really being the master sequencer and arranging things in real time, that I have access to the frequency content like this on multiple instruments. Because I really need to be able to make room for other instruments to come in. So if I want to bring in something like the Revolution, I might filter down the sound that I'm using on the Darkstar. But we'll get to the Revolution in just a minute. Do you hear how the kick drum here is no longer 4 on the floor, but all the drums are the same? This is what I was talking about when I was saying that I have some break patterns in the Digitact. There are 4 patterns total, and basically I have the main pattern where it's just the full drums and the Digitact sending a 1-note hold down to the arpeggio. That's my main pattern. And then I have that exact same pattern, but with these broken drums. So it's not 4 on the floor, but everything else stays the same. And then I have this exact same thing again underneath it in the Digitact, but the only difference is that we're holding down a chord into the Digitact and not a 1-note. So if I switch over to one of the arpeggios, that sounds best when you're holding down a chord, like this really nice dub arpeggio, and I switch to the pattern that is holding down a chord instead of a note, then we get holding down like a chord here. And it's always the same. I have control over the frequencies of this at any time using this big cutoff knob on the filter. This really gives me the ability to shape those frequencies in real time. For instance, I can carve out some of the high frequency content on this arpeggio, giving room in the mix for the dub chord to come in. I can turn that on and start making that come to life, right? So now we've got both of those going in real time. Now I can sort of raise the filter on the chords arpeggio to get more intensity. We could add something else, right? Then I can tweak that new sound in real time. If I want these chords to be gone, if I want that dub chord sound to be gone, you know, my options are I can either fade it out from the keyboard itself, or I can filter it down, or pretty much out of the mix, or I can change the preset on the Darkstar. But that's the point that I'm trying to get across, is that in this jam, all of the tracks are pretty much just always going, and it's just up to me as the master sequencer as to what I'm letting come through in the mix at that time. Let me just show you a couple more of these Darkstar presets that I really, really like. I love these really kind of 7th chords that sound really funky and housey. So having access to turning the drum sounds off in real time, even when they're auto-magicking away, I can still turn them on and off. Let's change the preset. So the preset changing on the virus, I'm just doing basically on that split second before the downbeat comes in, so that it's like, you know, you don't really hear that preset change. It'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and change it right before that downbeat comes in. And so that sort of helps establish sort of the feeling of those scenes that I was talking about earlier as well, where multiple things will change at the same time. Those automatic magic drums that I've created really help with this sort of a thing, where it really feels like things are changing and setting off like a new section. I find that's really a challenge for live jams. And I can take it away by just filtering it out, right? And then once I filtered it out, I can kind of play the fool over here and change presets as needed. I think also having so many presets in the Darkstar really means that I can take this jam into lots of different places, and I could have easily jammed this out for a lot longer than 20 minutes as well. Oh, hey, thanks very much, Brian. Right, thanks, Sean. Great question. The riser sound is basically just a sample that I've got here in the Squarp Rample. I'm using sort of my go-to noise impact sound that I use in place of a crash cymbal. But the riser sound is just a sample. And then we've got that sort of impact sound. Here we had a crash instead of that actual noise crash. I've got a couple of different samples in the rample that we can trigger, so it's not always that exact same noise crash. Sometimes it's an actual crash sound. And the riser actually scrolls between two different samples. One has a tiny little bit more melodic content than the other one. The other one I think is just white noise and a filter. So you can hear that even when I've got the filter all the way down, that some of this sound is still bleeding through. That's the virus here. But again, I can't stress this enough. When everything is going, you really just don't hear that in the background, and it wasn't an issue for me. Okay, what is next? So yeah, all in all, I'm using 20 different presets on the Virus Darkstar, and I want to discuss this actually because I think a lot of people would look at me as a sample maker and as a sound designer and as a synth programmer and say, wait, you're using other people's presets in your music? And I would say, yes, absolutely, 100%. I have zero problem with any of that. I don't have a problem using loops. I don't have a problem using samples. I don't have a problem using presets right out of the synthesizer. And I don't understand the mind flow of people who do, to be honest with you. At the end of the day, it's just about making music. If I needed to take the time and program, 20 more synthesizers from scratch to be able to make this set, there's absolutely no way that I would have been able to build this set in 2 weeks. I built this set absolutely from scratch for the whole sole purpose of being for this particular show. This was the only performance of this set, and that's all there is to say about that. I don't have time to program my own sounds for every single project that I'm going to do. And I encourage other people to use presets and to use loops and to use samples in your music. Those are what those tools are for. To buy a synthesizer and be afraid to use the sounds that are in it, I really don't understand that. The sounds aren't going to be night and day better because you program them yourself. I mean, I love to program sounds. As a sound designer, I think I like making sound content more than I even like making music. But at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about making music, and you need to get your work done. So yeah, absolutely, these are all presets that I found from other packs and other designers. None of these sounds are my sounds or my presets. Let's see here. Let's talk about the Revolution, shall we? I really wanted to get some sort of an acid line, like 303 acid line in this jam, and I had a few different options for that. I have a Zox box, which is like a 303 emulation that I could have used. But at the end of the day, I found it really easy to just use the Revolution. And this ties back into that last concept that I was talking about, excuse me, also, and that is the Revolution allows you to just scroll through random patterns that are built into it. And that's exactly what I did for this set. I did not write any of these acid lines. These are all coming from the inbuilt content to the quasi-MIDI Revolution. All I did was get my set going, find a sound that I really liked, and then I just randomized the patterns until things worked, and then I saved 8 different patterns into the Revolution so that at any time during the jam, I can pick one of those patterns, and on the downbeat of the next measure, it will start playing. Or I can pick an empty pattern, and on the downbeat of the next measure, it will stop playing. I use this as my 303 line, basically, for the jam. I've only got one sound coming out of this, and I'm able to do quite a bit of messing with the filter cutoff in real time, sort of the same way that I was discussing earlier about needing to have access to the frequency content. That gives me the sort of a filtering frequency content control over the chord sound, the sort of housey chord that comes in and out of the mix. That gives me frequency content control over everything coming out of the Dark Star, and then really frequency content control of the 303 line using its inbuilt filter as well. So that's the Revolution and the Virus. I mean, I'm really leaning on these heavily to get this groove. I really like being able to have different sounds and whatnot come in. And remember, I said I'm using 20 different patches from the Virus at the end of the day here. Okay, hey, 22 people hanging out with me. I appreciate everyone tuning in. Thank you very much. Let's move on to some of these other elements in this set, shall we? I've got a really awesome arpeggio that I'm really stoked on, actually, that came as one of the last elements to put this together. And let me get that going for you. If I mute these, but don't, can I just play that only? Cool, all right. So this is an arpeggio. It's being programmed by the Erica Synths Black Sequencer, and it's coming out of the Expert Sleepers Disting EX Plus Alpha, which is basically a module that allows us to do lots and lots and lots of different things with one module. It can be a filter, it can be a stereo reverb, it can be an oscillator, it can be a sample player, it can be a sample recorder. Like, it has like 80 some odd different functions. And just right in the week, but while I was building the set, they added a firmware update, and they added a new algorithm, which is and get this, which is a polyphonic wavetable player. Polyphonic. So what that means is you've got, if I were to have the MIDI breakout for this, I could now plug a MIDI keyboard directly into this module and play polyphonic chords, and that is something really, really amazing for those of you who have played with Eurorack at all, in that most of these modules are monophonic modules. So to have a module that does a lot of stuff, and suddenly it's now also a polyphonic wavetable synthesizer, that is really fantastic. So what I'm doing is I'm using a wavetable to make the sound. But I've got an LFO, assigned to the wavetable so that I'm doing just a tiny little bit of not filter movement, but of wavetable movement on the sound so that it changes automagically just a little bit. So I can bring that in and out in real time at any time. I've got just a few different patterns inside of the Erica Sense sequencer. You can switch patterns in this similarly to the way that we can switch patterns inside of the Digitact, meaning we just tell it which pattern we want it to go to, and on the downbeat of the next measure, it'll switch to that new pattern. I pretty much only have like, one sort of bass line. I just kind of made sure that, the drums and the bass would sort of just go with all of the other elements that I was adding. And then I just sort of went with it in that direction. But what I've got is I've got on channel 3 here, if I can figure out how to get this to play, please. Pattern, maybe this one. Yeah, cool. I've got a percussion sound that starts up. It's really loud here. I'm going to turn that down just a little bit. And I've got it running through a filter with the LFO moving that filter. So do you hear how the sound is kind of being filtered really gently just to give it that little bit of extra movement? So I can sort of bring that percussion sound in and out using the Erica Sense sequencer as well. Just a little bit of an extra something for rhythm. Just that little bit of extra, rhythm accent, and it's, got a little bit of that movement. Okay. So let's see here. The bass itself, the bass sound, let me show you this. 4, 2, 2, 3, and 4. Let's start the sequencer. And go to the right pattern. 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, and 3, 4, 1. Okay, cool. And then we can get that bass going again. I've got the bass sound. Let this. I can turn that off. I've got the bass sound running through the Electron Analog Heat MK2, so that it's giving sort of a little bit of extra bottom end and life and character to the sound. If I bypass that, we kind of lose everything, right? Like, where'd the bass go? But if I add that back in, it's really just adding some drive and some saturation to this sound, which is really helping it cut through the mix and keep up with my really fat drum sounds. It's actually almost almost writing over the drum sounds instead of sitting with the drum sounds. I don't know if you can hear that. The other thing in this is that I felt that if I kept the audience just pushing that 4 on the floor groove for 20, this is a 135 beats per minute. Not super fast, but certainly not, down tempo or chill out. And I felt that if I just, kept pushing that the whole time, that it would probably get a little bit tedious. So I came up with a way to add some drum loops instead. Now these are just standard drum loops that I found out of some sample packs. They're not my drum loops, I didn't program them. In fact, I think these are from some pretty old school breaks sample packs. And what I've done is just done some EQ work on them, made them mono instead of stereo, so I can load them in my Eurorack samplers. And I've only got 2 drum loops loaded into the sampler, so at any time, I can just switch it between one drum loop or the other drum loop. Hey, 22 people in the chat. Thanks for hanging out, everyone. Now, I'm using the quad switch from Dopefer, which is a really neat module. It allows you to run a signal into it, like a CV signal or a trigger signal, and then there's two outputs, and you can use this switch to decide which of those two outputs it is going to send the signal to. So for instance, if you're running like a hi-hat, trigger into this, you could pick hi-hat 1 or do the switch to the bottom and choose hi-hat sound number 2. It's a way for you to basically switch sounds in real time. The neat thing about this module is that it's a passive module, meaning it does not require any power from your system. You just pop it right in, no power involved at all. It's just 4 switches. And instead of using it to direct the trigger to like one sound or another sound, I'm literally just using it as an on and off switch. If I push the switch up, it turns on the audio to that drum loop. If I pull it down, it switches off the audio to that drum loop. So remember how I was saying that everything in this mix is just kind of always going in real time, and it's up to me to decide what I'm sending through. So I can mute the drums, using the DivKid mutes modules, and then turn on a different drum loop, at any time to create those different sections or whatnot. And I can choose over here with the knob on the module in real time which of those 2 drum loops it's going to spit out. Now, when I was putting this together and starting to practice, these little sections and whatnot, I thought that was really nice to have that change to go to, but I felt like it still wasn't going to be enough to drive a full 20 minutes set together while keeping the audience's attention. So I thought I'll bring in some halftime grooves as well. Went through some more sample packs, found these huge thundering dubstep halftime drums. And it's the same thing. I just did a little EQ on them, put them into mono instead of stereo so that I could load it into my Tip Top Audio 1 sampler here. And there's only 2 drum loops in here. So if I switch the knob, it changes which drum loop is playing. Wait for it. These are 4-bar drum loops. So if I turn the knob anywhere but like that last little few seconds, I'll switch it here in 1, 2. Let's switch it. So hear that tiny, tiny pause there, almost like a rest before it started again. That's me switching the sample. But you don't really hear that so much when all the other tracks are going. So I can switch back and forth between these 2 drum beats in real time. Or, take those out and at any time bring in these other drum loops. So the key here is that I'm creating sort of sections, patterns, and moods that I'm able to take the jam in. Remember I said I can either do a 4 on the floor pattern while we're holding down a note arpeggio, or I can do a 4 on the floor pattern that's holding down a chord arpeggio, or we can do either one of those same patterns but with a broken kick drum, so we change the vibe a little bit. Or I can turn those drums off entirely and bring in either the full-time drum loop, which is playing at regular speed, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or the halftime, which changes everything up entirely because it's literally half speed. Now, depending on when I bring these, beats in or when I take out the other things is all happening in real time. And I've got to say, it was a whole lot to keep track of in real time as well. Okay, so we got the arpeggio, the bass, the extra percussion. We got the Automagic drums. Let me get this groove going, and I'm going to show you one of the things that I did to help the transitions sound a little bit better as well. Let me just bring back like a cool... All right. 4, 2, 3, and cool. Unmute that. Where's my bass though? 2, 3, and cool. There's the bass. Okay, so and that's down. Okay, so let's say we've got like a pattern going, right? And I'm counting the whole time. 2, 2, 3, 4, right? And I'm listening for that, for that riser sound and that downbeat sound so that I can be sure that I'm on the beat all the time. All of these are being routed into a DJ mixer here. This is the Allen Heath Zone DB2 DJ mixer, but this technique you can do with any DJ mixer. Basically, all I'm doing is I've got it set up to where if I press the button here, I can set a high-pass filter on, and then if I roll the knob above that high-pass filter, it sends the whole mix to some reverb. And then I let go of the high pass filter and it just goes back to normal. So it's just a way to, I know I say this a lot, but it's my bag. It's a way to help with that ebb and flow and forward momentum in the jam by lifting up the sort of low frequency content, pushing it up, and then dropping it back down again when you let go of the button. I'm going to turn the volume up and I'll do that again in real time so you guys can hear what I mean. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, sending that reverb. And then you let go and it just kind of goes back to normal again. Play that for you one more time. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, let it go. Just as a way to help that momentum. So just like that, I switch the preset on the Dark Star. I turn on the Revolution and we're just going. I just basically make sure that the changes that I'm making with the changing of the arpeggio sound or changing of the 303 acid line sound, either turning it on or off, are all happening on the downbeat. And again, I'm really using the momentum of that riser and the, here it comes again. Using those as my, keys to help my brain stay on the grid and know when to make those changes. Sometimes, especially when you're live and, the adrenaline is flowing, you can easily get lost and maybe get off the beat entirely. But then here comes that sound to save you and you know exactly where you are on the grid again. Can't recommend that enough. Another really, let's see here. Another really awesome trick, I don't know if it's a trick per se, but another really awesome thing that I figured out to do that really helped the overall sound of this mix kind of glue together was I used the MPC Live at the end of my chain here. I'm going to see if I can't carefully move the camera so that I can show you what I mean without unplugging too much stuff here. Sorry. But I've got the Akai MPC Live here, and I'm taking the main output from the DJ mixer, which has got everything run into that, and I'm running that into the input here of the MPC Live. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody go run out and buy an MPC Live to use it the way that I'm showing you here. But if you've got gear that you're not using in the jam that you're building, and you suddenly find a way to get that into the jam you're using in a beneficial way, I would absolutely suggest going for it. How I'm using this is I've got a maximizer plugin loaded. And what does that mean exactly? It allows me to do a couple of things. And most importantly, it allows me to glue the mix together. For those of you who are familiar with limiters, this has a limiter in it. And it also allows me to do a really special production trick that I'm used to being able to do using Ableton. And that is turning all of the frequencies in the mix below a certain amount into a mono signal. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, most of the club systems that are in clubs today are mono systems. you're not typically going to have a really big stereo system in a club. I don't know why. I'm not a club sound guy. That's just the way it is. So if you want your music to represent across all systems, across all, speaker systems in different clubs and whatnot, you're really going to want to have your low frequency content centered into a mono frequency. That way, it's going to represent more accurately on different systems. This is a huge tip and something that I've been able to do inside of Ableton for years and years, but not something that I've been able to do inside of like a DAW-less jamming environment. And the MPC Live allowed me to do that using the Maximizer plugin. I'm doing just a little bit of gentle limiting. We're not like squashing the signal, but I'm using that just to keep any sort of stray, weird, peaky sounds from, sending through. And that allows me to get a much more even and consistent output, so I can kind of set a level and not worry about all those little peaks kind of triggering the red and whatnot. And it really just kind of helped to glue everything together the same way that you would do with like master bus processing inside of like Ableton Live. That was a really big bonus to use. I knew this was going to take a long time to explain. Thank you to everyone who's still hanging around. It's been an hour now talking through this set, but I really think that this is the kind of information that's really lacking from YouTube, and that's why I want to do these kind of streams. Like so many people are posting jams. Hey, look at me! Look at this awesome thing that I created. But if you want to be able to create something like that, and you start trying to find out, well, how do I create stuff like that? How did they do that? There's so many ways to go about all of these different things that it's sometimes hard to get a grasp on like which techniques might work for you, which gear might work for you, how to better use the gear you've got, all of those kinds of concepts. Let's see if I'm missing any important questions here in the chat. 21 people still hanging with me. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Ed. Hey, Sean. Got Martin, Cy, Michael. Hey, Andrew. All right. Yeah, that's a bummer. Maybe next time, Andrew. There's going to be the next one, I think, April 4th. April 1st, April Fool's Day for Clownfest 5. I think that's strangely appropriate. I think I might want to try to get a set on the first day if that's really what's going on, because that would be super fun. I'm just trying to see if I've forgotten any of the elements that are making this up, and I don't think I have. I think we've covered everything. So if anyone has any questions at all, whether it be about this jam or any music related questions at all, now would be a good time, because I think we're going to be wrapping it up here soon. I'm going to just make sure I've got the drum loops. I covered those. That's just the bonus here, is that I'm just literally turning everything on and off in real time. It was definitely a challenge, but I find that like getting a spot in this online festival definitely pushed me to do this. It took me 2 weeks of work. I set aside the last 2 weeks of December so that I would have nothing else on the schedule, no YouTube videos, etc., so that I could just put this together. It takes quite a bit of time to go through and find sometimes the samples when I'm doing like using a lot of samples and whatnot, or to pick out the drum sounds took another day. So yeah, 2 weeks is what it took me to put together for this from scratch for a 20-minute set. Again, I think I probably could have easily stretched this out to 30 minutes or longer with all of the different elements that I had. For instance, with the Dark Star arpeggios that I'm using, none of those got repeated. So there's no like sections that we go back to that you're like, oh yeah, I remember this right on. It just kind of goes and it just sort of keeps driving for those full 20 minutes. We could have easily, gone back and forth and revisited stuff and made it quite a bit longer. When I was setting it up and creating all the pieces, I just wanted to make sure that I had enough pieces to turn on and off to kind of like drive it in different areas in different directions, to keep the audience interested for that full 20 minutes. I really think that the Acid Box 3 filter from Erica Sense was absolutely essential to me here. I've wanted this kind of thing in my workflow for literally years, and I just kind of work without it. But it just really needed to happen at this time. I think I'm often putting things through like a hardware effect, and then at the end, I really wish I could just filter that whole thing down just super easily. And this will enable me to have the ability to do that in lots of future live jams as well. All right. Unless there's any questions in the chat, then I think that we are going to call it for today. I really appreciate everyone joining in. We're going to be back on Sunday. I'm thinking we'll probably be doing a Eurorack patch lab. I'm not 100% on that. We might do something else, but we're probably going to do a Eurorack patch lab. Fantastic. I appreciate everyone being here with me. And until next time, thanks for watching.